This is the definition, generally speaking, that we turn to, which is about a definition for innovation in a social context. And so it is an initiative, a product, a process, or a program that profoundly changes the basic routines, the resource flows, the authority flows, or the beliefs of any social system. So what does that mean? What does that look like? This is where I have seen it already, parts of this being true in your plans. In the Social Prosperity Wood Buffalo action report and plan, in things I've heard since I've been here in the community. This very top one is kind of a bit of an overarching thing, but I really want you to pay attention to it. These are things you've already, I can see, are here. These are part of creating the conditions for social innovation. We often use metaphors for social innovation that are very organic in nature. Tanya talked about the organic nature of an emerging idea or initiative. So rather than sort of a mechanical metaphor, we use kind of this organic metaphor. And so often we say that social innovation is similar to growing crops. And if you think about farmers, or the people who want crops to grow, and you're trying to grow change, farmers don't grow crops. Farmers create the conditions for crops to grow. And that's what social innovators do. That's what communities do that want to be innovative. They try to create as many conditions in their community, in their context, to help social innovation to happen, and then to know when they can push it and when they can add and subtract different elements. So one very important piece to have in the mix is this idea of diversity, and diversity in every single way that you can think about it. So I've noticed people talking about all the different sectors that are engaged. People are talking about we've got to have youth engaged, we must have First Nations engaged. All the newcomers that come to Fort McMurray are a challenge, but also they're this great opportunity because they bring different perspectives, different experiences, different points of view on the world, etc. And so I can hear you talking about the importance of diversity and your willingness and your strong intent to keep engaging and engaging and engaging. Without diversity in a system, you don't have what you need to really come up with the creative potential solutions or initiatives to address problems that actually are going to get enough buy-in and enough investment that you have something that's more than just the next great flavor of the week, but there's something that's sustainable and durable. There's enough all-round benefit for all, and therefore it's going to have some real life. You've talked about this new ideas for practice and operations and organizations. So in that academic definition where it talks about changing basic routines, I think this is what you're talking about. We will do things differently. We will act differently. We'll start thinking about shared spaces, shared resources, shared administrative things. This is the routines that we have around. We are willing to think about maybe doing it differently. You talk about resource and authority flows. So you talk a lot about resources. Resources are not only financial resources. We tend to think that resources always means money, but it means knowledge resources. And you have events like today, you have the toolkit, you have upcoming workshops. We've designed a series of 4 workshops that will be offered in this community over the next year. Imagine Canada is going to be doing some training, so you're pulling in information and knowledge resources. And there's human resources, and you're thinking about how to engage, how to increase volunteerism. And it's not only about having more, but having what you need now and having it when you need it and deploying it where you need it. So you're getting a lot more strategic in thinking about resources of all kinds. And I noticed this thinking about the, I can't remember what the acronym meant, but it's the living out allowance. So that's an example of some effort to think about at that level of what we call authority flows, but what that means is rules and policies and laws and the regulations that govern our lives, whether it's at an organizational level or a government level, provincial government level. You're thinking about that at that structural level. Something in that way, those flows need to change. And lastly, probably what I've been struck with most since I've been here is just this general sense that you're trying to you have a culture here that you're proud of that is about a community that has values, that takes care of each other, that is welcoming, et cetera, and that you're really trying to enhance that with awards, with campaigns, with how you're thinking about engagement, with some of the challenges that you're intentionally trying to address, you're popping up into the light this idea that this is what we believe about our community. This is what we believe to be true. This is our culture. Here's some things that we don't think we talk about enough, and we want to talk about it more. Here's things we think get talked about way too much, and that's not the whole story, so we want to talk about that less. You are trying to build a certain kind of culture here from what you feel is some of your best pieces of your existing culture. So that's this cultural flows. So when we look at that definition of social innovation and what you do to create conditions, when you try to operate at those levels of we call them the institutional pieces within your system, you're doing all of that already. I'd like to just talk for a moment about remembering and leveraging the whole system. So a whole system approach, you know, I'll just, like in a nutshell, it means to remember how very interconnected everything is. And you can't sort of often drill down on one little piece of a problem and think, well, if I take care of that, then you know, you forget that that's connected to this, and that's connected to that, and that's connected to that, and I'm going to have this domino effect. And I really loved the image that Russell put together around the ship, because it is a story of a voyage, of traveling together from one place in time and space to another place in time and space, and talks about, you know, there's some wind and waves, so these influences, they're going to be, you know, not always predictable and certainly part of the journey. What I'd like to suggest you might also like to think about is, what if it's a whole bunch of boats? What if it's not just one ship that everybody's on, but what if it's actually a whole bunch of boats out on a bay, and there's some place they're trying to get to together? And let's say they decide they need to get to that next harbor, that tomorrow that you're going towards, and they try to start moving, but they find that something's holding them back. Some are pushing, but others are being dragged in a direction they didn't want to go. And what if all of these ships on the harbor were actually invisibly, they can't see it, but all connected with these great big cables underwater? They can feel the influence of it, but they can't really see it. That's what it's like to operate when you start being aware of operating in a system. There's all these sort of invisible influences and things that are constraining or offering you opportunity, and you're not always aware of them all. If you were these ships, once you become aware of that, then you know that we can see how we're all connected. If we want to get from here to there, we can figure out a plan together to all move in that direction. But if you don't know that those connections exist and you haven't kind of examined them and done some analysis as part of your planning, you might kind of even work at cross purposes to each other. That's all I'm really going to say about systems, except to talk here about scale. Systems are not only connected, you know, at one level, but they kind of have this whole scale thing going on as well. I know I'm being terrible with the microphone. Are you able to hear me okay? I'll never, ever make a rock star. So things are going on when you're talking about change that you want to see happen in a system. We ask you to think about scale, what's going on at different scales, and then also what you want to have go on at different scales. So this shows you from an individual level to a network or group level. This is a group. To an organizational level, and then up to this institutional level. And if you were trying to have some significant change, in what ways can you change things at an individual level? And you can see that you're changing people's habits, people's hearts, people's ambition, what they're trying to achieve. There's other things that happen at other levels, all the way up to this sort of institutional level where you're looking at a change in culture, a change in policies, resource distribution, et cetera. But all these different scales, and these are only 4, they're not necessarily all there is, but there's things going on at multiple levels. And the more that you can think about those levels in your plans and think about, we want people to act differently and feel differently and have dreams in a certain way, but then we also have to remember something's going to have to happen at the group level that's different. Our organizations are going to have to operate differently. Our community has to operate differently. And there's this whole other level that kind of influences the community. So to think about those different scales, you can be watching for the opportunities where you can change at that level as well. So then I wanted to talk to you about this idea of complexity. In Getting to Maybe, there's a whole section that talks about the difference between simple, complicated, and complex. The point that I kind of want to make for you here is that we talk about change that we want to see, And change can actually be teased out. I just showed you that slide of the scale to say that change looks different. Big change that really can influence things in very strong ways looks different at different levels of scale. But change also is not, problems are not all the same, and solutions are not all the same. Change is not all the same. So the good news is not everything is complex. You know, some things are very simple. And this little graph I've often found very helpful in helping me to sort of assess with others, well, what kind of problem are we actually looking at? And therefore, what kind of solution do we need? Because the big trick is to match the kind of solution or initiative that you're putting together to the sort of problem context that you're having to look at, because that's the kind of change you want. You know, one of the most dangerous things that happens in the world, and you can probably almost immediately think of a number of examples of this, is when we have very, very complex problems, sometimes national or global problems, and people want to apply very, very simple solutions to it. And that almost always goes amok. It just doesn't work very well. But the same goes the other way. If you have a fairly simple problem, and then you just get all excited about trying out a very, very complex solution, it's a waste of your time and your energy and your resources, not necessary. So this, Ralph Stacey, quite a while ago now, put together this graph that's based on, you know, what's your degree of agreement? So how much do we agree what this problem's all about? And then what's your degree of certainty about what you should do? So if you, pretty much we all agree that this is what the problem is and what we want to see be different. And we all have, you know, quite a lot of agreement on what we think is the answer, and we'll just move forward on that. That's a simple problem. You have a great deal of agreement and a great deal of certainty about what to do. Then if you go out a little bit farther, a little less agreement, a little less certainty. Now it's getting a bit riskier. Not quite sure what to do. We don't have everybody on board. Maybe we've got enough people, but not everybody. That gets a bit more complicated. And you have to take different kinds of strategies for that. And then clearly the further that you get out, the more complex it gets. So some of the problems that you're looking at are problems that might be simple or complicated. Really important things to address and really important things to adapt and to try to do differently. Some of the problems, especially maybe some of those things that came up when we talked about the no's and people are talking about, here's the big things that are definitely going to shut us down if we don't pay attention to them. Those might fall into the complex category. You know better than I about that. You can make that assessment about how complex that is. How much do people in the community agree that that's a problem and that we understand the problem in the same way? How much are we sure about what we should do about it? Or is there a great big gulf in between different ideas about how to address something? Once you have that kind of situation going on, you have a very complex situation. And our work has mostly been looking at very complex problems and trying to think about how does change happen when you're operating in that level. This is not on the slide, but once you go past that, you go into complete chaos, and I just thought, for today, we just wouldn't go there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But if you get there, you can call us up. So I thought now that I'd just share with you a tool that kind of honors complexity and that a lot of organizations and individuals and initiatives find helpful in just making sense when they find themselves working in a very complex environment. And it's called the adaptive cycle. Are there people in the room that are already very familiar with the adaptive cycle besides Kathy Glover, who I know knows it so well? Okay, so you'll bear with me if we go through it again. And I use it all the time. All the time. I have actually read, sincerely, read getting to maybe at least 8 times because I use it in my work all the time. And this particular tool, my team and I find very helpful in assessing, okay, where are we? What's going on? What do we need to look out for? What's happening next? How can we plan better? Why are we feeling this way right now? When are we going to feel better about it? And so I'm going to go through just a little bit of that with you. Because I think that you might find it interesting to consider about the initiative that you're involved in right now, about some of the processes that you want to see happen,